Imagine a typical morning in ancient Egypt, 3,500 years ago. The sun is just rising over the Nile, and the heat hasn't become unbearable yet. A mother is getting her young son ready for scribe school. She packs a fresh barley loaf, a couple of onions, and hands him a heavy jug of beer to take with him. This isn't a joke, a historical error, or a sign of a neglectful home. It was a harsh necessity, a tool for survival without which a child might not have made it to sunset. To us today, giving alcohol to children seems like a crime. But 4,000 years ago, it was the exact opposite. Leaving a child without their portion of brew was considered a surefire way to kill them. Why were the Egyptians convinced that beer was healthier than fresh milk? How did an entire nation manage to stay sober while consuming alcohol for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And why did this specific diet allow the Egyptians to build the greatest structures in history, while other civilizations were being wiped out by disease? Right now, you're going to find out why that morning jug held a strict logic of survival, a logic without which ancient Egypt simply could not have existed. Let's establish the facts right away. In Egypt, everyone drank. From the mighty pharaoh in his golden palace to the lowliest laborer in the limestone quarries, and children were no exception. Beer was a staple of their diet, as natural to them as bread or clean tap water is to us today. If you had asked an ancient Egyptian, "Why are you giving this to a child?" they would have looked at you with total confusion. For them, it wasn't a matter of choice or entertainment. It was a matter of staying alive. The Egyptians even had a goddess of beer, Tenet. They believed the art of brewing was a gift from the god Osiris himself. In their hieroglyphics, the phrase food and drink was often represented by the symbols for bread and a jug of beer. It was the foundation of their civilization. Beer was used to pay wages, it was offered to the gods, and it was even brought into the afterlife. But let's be honest, when we hear the word beer, we think of noisy bars, glass bottles, and adults acting, well, a bit recklessly. And that is exactly where the trap in our perception lies. If someone offered you a sip of Egyptian beer, called heket today, you would probably spit it out and ask, "What is this porridge?" Ancient Egyptian beer looked nothing like the clear, bubbly, carbonated drink we know. First of all, it was thick. Imagine a liquid oatmeal or a very dense smoothie. There were bits of grain, breadcrumbs, and husks floating in it. In fact, Egyptians often drank it through special straws with filters on the end so they wouldn't get a mouthful of cereal with every sip. Secondly, it was very low in alcohol. While modern beer is usually 4% to 6% alcohol, the Egyptian child's version was barely 1% or 2%. It was a light fermentation that gave the drink a specific sour tang, but it didn't cloud the mind the way we expect alcohol to do. And most importantly, it was incredibly nutritious. It was, quite literally, liquid bread. Let's look at how it was made. The process was a stroke of primitive genius. The Egyptians took specially baked, half-baked loaves of barley or emmer wheat. They crumbled this bread into huge vats of water, added dates or honey for sweetness, and left it to ferment in the sun. During fermentation, a miracle happened. The yeast and bacteria processed the sugar, enriching the drink with B vitamins, amino acids, and proteins. For an Egyptian child growing up in constant heat and doing physical chores, this jug was a superfood. It was a powerful energy shake. When a young Egyptian drank their portion, they weren't getting buzzed, they were getting the calories needed to survive a day under the scorching sun. If they drank only water, they would get hungry quickly. If they ate only dry bread, they would lack essential vitamins. Beer solved both problems at once, but there was one more factor, far more important than calories, a factor that made beer a literal life-saving elixir. Now for the most important secret. Imagine the Nile, a majestic river, the source of all life. But in that river, people bathed, waste was dumped, and parasites and bacteria thrived. Drinking raw water from the Nile or its canals was a death sentence. Dysentery, cholera, and a host of other diseases killed people by the thousands. Ancient Egyptians didn't know the word bacteria. They didn't understand microbiology, but they were incredibly observant. They noticed one simple thing. People who drank water often got sick and died. People who drank beer lived longer and stayed healthy. Why? Because the brewing process involved two layers of protection. Heat. The water for the mash was often heated, which killed off many pathogens. Fermentation. The process of fermentation produced alcohol and lactic acid. Even in small concentrations, these created an environment where deadly bacteria simply could not survive. Beer was the first safe water technology in human history. By giving her child beer for school, a mother ensured he wouldn't catch a lethal waterborne illness. Essentially, it was their version of boiling water, a concept humanity wouldn't fully grasp for thousands of years. This is why the Egyptians were able to build the pyramids. Thousands of workers living in cramped camps didn't die out from epidemics only because their daily ration included several liters of safe, sterile, nutritious beer. It was the fuel of a great civilization. We look at Egyptian history and gasp, "Oh my God, they gave kids booze." But if you think about it, we are the ones living in a very strange, abnormal world. We have bottled purified water, pasteurized milk, and vitamins in pills. To an Egyptian, our world would look like magic. But for their time, they were incredibly rational. They used the forces of nature, fermentation and malt, to protect their children from the invisible killers lurking in the water. Today, we separate food and alcohol by a massive chasm. For us, alcohol is a luxury, an escape, or a problem. For an ancient person, it was medicine, protection, and life itself. Perhaps that jug in the hands of an Egyptian schoolboy is a reason to pause and think. What things that we consider unhealthy or weird today are actually just our own ways of adapting? Who knows how people will look at our habits in 3,000 years? Maybe our protein bars or energy drinks will seem just as crazy to them as a child's breakfast in the shadow of the Great Pyramids seems to us.